Our relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the affair archivist, and this month's affair to remember is that between John Lennon and May Pang. Please note, while I used several resources in my research for this video, the majority of it is based on May Pang's memoir, Loving John, published in 1983, which is her account of the lost weekend and her affair with John Lennon. May Pang was 19 years old when she walked into the New York office of Apple Records and asked for a job. It was the autumn of 1969, and the Beatles had been the biggest band in the world for over 5 years. For a young woman like May, working for the Fab Four's record label was a dream come true. She lied about being able to type, file, and answer phones, and was hired as an assistant to Alan Klein, the Beatles' manager. She was told none of the Beatles ever made an appearance in the New York office of the record label, and for a while May didn't see or meet any members of the band. But that would soon change. In fact, she would become intimately acquainted with one Beatle in particular, John Lennon, who infamously dubbed the 18th-month period in which their affair took place as his lost weekend. Not everyone can say their first boyfriend was John Lennon, but May holds this unique distinction, and her relationship with John marks a significant chapter in Lennon's life, one which, she argues, is very different from the common perception that was created by John, Yoko Ono, and the press. Throughout his life, John Lennon would struggle with the fact that both of his parents were absent. Perhaps it was this early trauma that shaped him into the troubled genius he was. Lennon was born in Liverpool in 1940. His father worked at sea and left the marriage after John's mother, Julia, had an affair and had children with another man. Julia's family felt she was unfit to raise John and sent him to live with his Aunt Mimi when he was 5. When he was 17, his mother was struck by a car and killed. John's grief and anger over this tragedy, which happened just as they were reconnecting, never left him. In the late 1950s, inspired by black music coming out of America, he formed the Quarrymen, which would later become the Beatles, and eventually recruited Paul McCartney to join the band. The Beatles would become arguably the most successful band of all time. Just as Beatlemania kicked off, John married his girlfriend Cynthia. Their son, Julian, was born in 1963. Yoko Ono was born in Tokyo in 1933 to a wealthy family. She moved to New York City in 1953 to attend college, but did not end up graduating. Yoko became an experimental artist. She was married twice and had one daughter with her second husband, filmmaker Anthony Cox. Yoko and John met in 1966 at an art gallery in London that was exhibiting her artwork. After divorcing their respective spouses, they were married in March of 1969. The controversy surrounding their relationship and how it factored into the end of the Beatles is still a topic of debate 50 years later. I will surely be revisiting John and Yoko's relationship in a later video. May Pang was born to Chinese immigrants in New York City in 1950. Her father was angry that his child was a girl and adopted a son. Her mother ran a laundry in the neighborhood to make ends meet. Her father was abusive towards her mother, something May witnessed frequently throughout her childhood. Early on, May found a deep love for rock and roll. Though she tried attending college, she dropped out and decided she wanted to work in the music industry. She may have started as an office assistant at Apple. However, within a short period, May had the opportunity to assist John and Yoko in the production of their experimental films, and flew to London to work for the couple. Both John and Yoko took a liking to May. She observed in her memoir that John liked her so much he started dressing like her during the recording of Imagine. She was officially hired as their personal assistant in 1970. Throughout her time working with them, she had a front row seat to John and Yoko's intense and oftentimes bizarre dynamic. May reflected in her memoir, Loving John, that John and Yoko were not intimate in a normal couple way. She wrote, "They behaved more like children snuggling against each other to ward off any demons that might be loose in the night." According to May, Yoko was often the one who wore the pants, but on the rare occasions when John would assert his dominance, she would become upset and withdrawn. John and Yoko did not adhere to typical boss-employee boundaries. Yoko confided in May that John slept with another woman at a party and that she had heard them. She also mentioned their infamous stint in primal therapy and that she knew John's deepest fears and resentments. This barrage of TMI confessions would be a lot for anyone to take, especially for a girl in her early 20s. Yet May maintained her professionalism, even when Yoko made a very unorthodox request of her. Towards the end of 1973, May arrived to work at the Dakota, John and Yoko's apartment in New York City. Just as she was getting settled into her office for the workday, Yoko approached her with a strange and unethical proposition.
She sat me down in the office one day and she said, we're having problems, which everybody in the house, who's working for them knew. And we were sitting there together, and she looked over at me. She goes, well, we're going to have, John's going to start seeing other people because we're not getting along. And I just stared at her and I said, yes. And I'm thinking, who am I going to be working for, him or her? And next thing you know, she said, well, I know that he likes you. And I said, excuse me? And she said, I know he likes you, and I know you're going to be good for him. But I said, but I don't want your husband. She said, that's okay. I know you're not wanting it. You don't want him, but it's okay.
She was raised Catholic and balked at the idea of dating her married boss. It'll be great, Yoko attempted to reassure her. May was resolute that there was no way this affair was going to happen, whether Yoko approved of it or not. However, no matter how resistant May was, she was no match for the persistence of Yoko. May hoped Yoko would drop the subject and she would be able to do her job as usual. However, during a recording session, May was instructed to go back to the Dakota to retrieve drums. When she returned, Yoko asked her if John was there and if he was in the nude. When May replied that he was there, but fully clothed, Yoko seemed disappointed. May was conflicted and considered resigning from her position. However, she was reticent to give up the amazing opportunity she had, and worried about being blacklisted if she quit. May was a lifelong lover of rock and roll and wanted to continue working in the music industry. Would Yoko and John make that difficult for her if she failed to adhere to their requests? Soon after Yoko suggested she become John's lover, May went to the studio with John, carrying his lyric sheets and money if he needed to get something during the session. While they were in the elevator leaving the apartment, John kissed May and said he had been waiting to do it all day. May pushed him away. John, unaccustomed to the word no, was shocked that she rejected him. During the session, John asked May what she thought of his vocals and songs. He was working on a song called Mind Games, which would become the title track of his next album. The cover art would also encapsulate this period for him. Yoko's face, appearing in the background in the image of a mountain, looks over John as he walks in the opposite direction. It was clear, after just 4 years of marriage, the two of them needed space. However, perhaps they were not quite ready to let go entirely, which could be why Yoko thought she was making a safe choice in selecting May as John's girlfriend. Since she was their employee, perhaps Yoko thought she could control May, and that the affair would begin and end at a time of her choosing.
She did not realize it was going to turn into such a big love affair. She thought it would be 2 weeks, gone, and goodbye. And it didn't turn out that way.
When they were done at the studio that night, John told May that he wanted to go home with her. May refused. Don't let the little green men get you, he told her, for some reason. The following day, when she arrived at work, Yoko asked for a progress report. Did she get together with John? She was again disappointed with May's response. In retrospect, May wrote that she believes Yoko ordered John to kiss her in the elevator and was also interrogated on the results of his efforts by Yoko afterwards. The following day, May breathed a sigh of relief when John got through the day without attempting to kiss or sleep with her. Bear in mind, May was 22 years old, and John was a full 10 years older than her, although age was clearly not the only thing throwing off the power balance in this situation. As time went on, May admitted to herself that she was attracted to John. She appreciated his wit, and she liked his nose. However, she was still hesitant to become romantically involved with her boss. One night, after his work was done in the studio, John canceled the limo scheduled to take him back to the Dakota and insisted he and May take a cab back to her place instead. May made it clear that she did not want John to come home with her. They got in a cab together, but May defiantly told the cabbie to take them to the Dakota rather than her address. John blew up and cursed at her. The cabbie recognized John and smirked. According to May, he insisted that he needed to see her to her front door and entered her apartment. With her boss in her home, May began crying. She was distraught and afraid, feeling immense pressure to have an affair with John, though her professionalism and Catholic values left her deeply conflicted. John sat on the floor with her and reassured her that he liked her, and that though Yoko suggested they become an item, it was because she could tell he was interested in her. May reiterated her confusion, and he said he was confused too, and cradled her in his arms, kissing her. She changed her mind, and they were intimate. However, After the deed was done, May regretted her decision and told John to leave, which he did. The following evening, John went home with May and they made love, this time with no hesitation on May's part. She wrote, "We fit together like a glove. We're perfect together." After they made love for a second time, John told May he needed to shower. Yoko commented on the smell of her perfume on him the evening before. Though her feelings about John were changing, John told May that Yoko only wanted their relationship to be physical, that if feelings got involved, it would upset her. She agreed to this condition, but it was only inevitable that both of them, in the end, would end up catching feelings. After their affair was underway, Yoko went back to being strictly professional with May and made no reference to the fact that she was sleeping with her husband. The first time the three of them were in the room together since the lost weekend began, Yoko seemed unbothered by what was happening and was relaxed and giggling despite the awkwardness of the situation. May once again had major doubts about her and John's relationship. She wanted to quit her job. John reassured her that Yoko was okay with what was happening, and May decided to stay. Though she continued working as John's assistant, Yoko stopped paying May her salary. Given their age difference, May was not as sexually experienced as John and considered him her teacher in the bedroom. She reflected, "We made love with our hearts and our souls as well as our bodies." Though they had a strong physical connection, they forged an emotional and intellectual bond as well. John took interest in May's Chinese heritage, often referring to her by her Chinese name, Feng Yi. They also bonded over their mutual love of music. It didn't take long for May to fall in love with her boss. Despite this, when Yoko left for Chicago to attend a conference on feminism, May was uncomfortable staying at the Dakota. Before leaving, Yoko once again reassured her that she was fine with their affair. However, May was uncomfortable with sleeping in John and Yoko's bed. So, John pulled his mattress into the living room so May did not have to sleep in their bedroom. The lost weekend is a period in John Lennon's life that even today is remembered as a low point. The public perception is that he was constantly drunk and depressed and that his marriage was on the rocks, resulting in some unsavory and very public behavior. However, he didn't really engage in much debauchery until he made the decision to travel westward to work on a new album. John, with May accompanying him, went to Los Angeles to record an album of classic rock and roll covers with Phil Spector. John and May took up residence in Lou Adler's mansion. Yoko called every day, multiple times a day. Though Yoko kept tabs on John throughout the lost weekend, she wanted to use it as an opportunity to establish her own career apart from her famous husband, and, allegedly, to have an affair of her own. She later said, "I was suffering being with John. The pressure from the public, being the one who broke up the Beatles and who made it impossible for them to get back together. My artwork suffered too. I thought I wanted to be free from being Mrs. Lennon, so I thought it would be a good idea for him to go to L.A. and leave me alone for a while. I had to put up with it for many years." In L.A., John and May felt free to act like a couple together. However, Yoko would soon catch wind of this. Yoko called May one morning after a recording session and told her she heard May and John had been holding hands. She told her, "You know you're not supposed to do that." May alleged that perhaps Yoko had spies following her and John. May began seeing a much darker side of John during their trip to L.A. After a booze-fueled recording session, which not much music was recorded, John kissed Jesse Ed Davis, one of the guitarists present at the session, in the parking lot of the studio. When Jesse kissed John back, John attacked him and called him the F-word. He had a violent outburst that resulted in him destroying a significant portion of Lou Adler's home and possessions, running about the streets, claiming no one loved him. He was tied to a bed with neckties to be restrained. He blamed Yoko for the situation and made threats to May's physical safety. May was shocked at how unhinged John became when he drank, and even more shocked the next morning when he remembered not even a second of what happened the evening before. According to May, Yoko blamed her for this incident, claiming that she had given John liquor, which May denied. For a time, May was able to forget this incident and enjoy her time with John. They went shopping together, took day trips to the desert, and took turns wearing each other's clothes since they were the same size. John bought her a nice camera which she used to take candid photos of him, which she later exhibited and published. In October, for May's 23rd birthday, John bought her a 1968 Barracuda. However, The good times were soon interrupted by another one of John's drunken and violent rages. John and May got lunch with David Cassidy, who was a teen idol at the time.
Me and David ordered the same eggplant parmesan, and John got very jealous. He went home, and I got back there, and he started screaming at me. He says, I knew it, you'd leave me for David Cassidy. And I'm going, what? What are you talking about? He goes, you were flirting with me. I said, well, I wasn't flirting, I just ordered the same. He goes, you ordered the same meal. I said, that's it. I ordered the same meal. And it was kind of strange.
In Loving John, May wrote, I approached him again, and he shoved me even harder. Then he reached out and grabbed my hair and pulled it so hard my head snapped back involuntarily. He reached out and wrenched my glasses from my face, threw them on the floor, and trampled them. On the coffee table he found the camera he had bought me and smashed it angrily against the tabletop. I stood stunned and terrified by the outburst. May claims that on a three-way call, in which all members of the love triangle were on the line, Yoko once again blamed her for giving John alcohol. This time Yoko took it a step further and accused May of only being with John for his fame and money. After they hung up, May recalls that John parroted Yoko's accusations of May being a clout chaser. She denied it. Unconvinced, John told May to book a flight back to New York. It's over, he repeated, as she cried. The following morning, after they both arrived in New York, May and John spoke on the phone. He said he didn't know what came over him and asked her to come back to L.A. May decided to go back with him because she was falling in love with him. This time, she set some boundaries with John before they returned to L.A. She was no longer going to tolerate abusive, drunken behavior. He had to assure her that he did not think she was only dating him for his money and fame, and that Yoko had not put him up to coming back to her. He promised he would get himself together, that he did not think she was only with him because he was John Lennon, and that he wanted to be with her. Less than 24 hours after leaving L.A., they were headed back. The second trip to L.A. went smoothly for several weeks, until John solemnly told May he wanted to go to the beach. She asked him what was wrong. He wanted to tell her when they arrived, but he decided to break the news to her then. He wanted to break up. May returned to New York in shock. She called Yoko, who asked her to come visit her to talk. Yoko listed off musicians from her band that May could date. May was stunned. After some time in New York, May was ordered by Yoko to return to L.A. to be with John while his son, Julian, was visiting. John hadn't seen Julian in nearly 3 years and was anxious about the visit. John's ex-wife, Cynthia, was also coming. Yoko couldn't go because she didn't get along with the boy, who was 10 years old at the time. Yoko made May get on a flight that night, even though she asked for a few days to mentally prepare to return to L.A. When she arrived, John was not at his apartment, and he did not appear for about 12 hours after her arrival. When he finally materialized, he jumped in bed with May and held her in his arms, apologizing. He told her that he asked her to leave because he was afraid of how much she was falling in love with her. He claimed that he faked his anxiety attack as a ploy to get Yoko to send May back to California. Yoko was actually the one who was nervous about John and Cynthia seeing each other again. She believed that Cynthia was still in love with John and would make an attempt to win him back. She feared that John would divorce her and leave her with a meager settlement, which is what happened to Cynthia. The visit overall went well until Cynthia made a comment about wanting another baby with John. One could assume she meant while they were married she wanted another child, but John seemed to interpret it as a desire she still held and told her he was sterile. He later remarked to May that Yoko was right. Cynthia was using the trip to try and win him back. One evening, John wanted to go to the Troubadour to watch Ann Peebles perform. He stuck a sanitary napkin to his forehead and insisted on wearing it to the club. John heckled the performance and cursed so everyone could hear him. Some laughed, fascinated by John's celebrity and drunken antics, but most were annoyed. May and John were asked to leave. On the way home, John jumped out of the moving car and nearly pulled May out into the street with him when she tried to get him back in. When they arrived at the apartment they were staying in, John once again became violent and destructive, according to May's account. Due to the disturbance his behavior was causing, the LAPD showed up at the door. John ran into his bedroom to hide. He was always anxious around the police, recalling the raid on his home in 1968 that resulted in his arrest and conviction for drug charges. May opened the door. The police had their guns drawn in her face. They told her they received a report that someone was shot in the apartment. She told them they could search the home, No one had been hurt. May convinced John to come downstairs to talk to the police. The officers were starstruck by Lennon. One even asked if he thought the Beatles would get back together, to which he replied, "You never know." They searched the house, presumably for illegal substances, told them to stop making noise, and left. May recalled that John went on another rampage after the cops left, destroying the apartment, grabbing May's jade necklace and stomping on it, blaming Roman Polanski for what had happened, even though they had not even seen him that night. In a panic, May called Yoko, who told May to call John's lawyer, and hung up. He eventually passed out and was horrified and apologetic about what he'd done in the morning, noticing he had destroyed his own guitar and May's necklace. The following morning, when May and John were leaving the apartment to meet Julian and Cynthia, there was a crowd outside their door. John's antics at the Troubadour had made headlines. Rock magazine's Circus published an article in which the waitress from the evening before claimed, when the evening was just about closing, she asked Lennon if he planned to tip her. Lennon reportedly peered into her face and said, "Don't you know who I am?" The waitress peered back and said, flatly, "You're some jerk with a Kotex around his head," and walked off. Lennon, outraged, did not leave a tip. May claims this was never said. John and May had to move into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel to avoid the barrage of press at their doorstep. Soon after this latest incident, May and John returned to New York for a week to deal with the legal issues involving the end of the Beatles. John requested that Mal Evans, the Beatles' longtime roadie and assistant, fix the apartment and May's jade necklace while they were back east. May preferred the New York version of John. During the day, they walked around the city, window shopped, went to the movies, got coffee. At night, they got dinner, watched Johnny Carson in her apartment, and did normal couple things. John was often recognized, but usually not bothered by New Yorkers. Even though he got drunk a few times, John did not go on an alcohol-fueled tear of destruction like he did in L.A. When May got sick, John went grocery shopping. This staple of everyday human life was alien to him. Because of his level of fame, it was rare that he did basic things like this by himself. He was overjoyed when he came back to the apartment with 2 full grocery bags. During legal negotiations for the official dissolution of the Beatles, John's attorneys informed him that Yoko wanted a divorce. After the meeting, he told May he needed to go to the Dakota to see her. May returned to her apartment and almost immediately got a call from Yoko, who asked how John seemed. May said he was fine. Yoko said she was afraid of him. May told her she had nothing to worry about. Yoko hung up. May was excited that she could possibly marry John because she loved him, but also questioned if it could really be that easy. John told her he would be a free man by June, that it was all for the best, that though they cared for each other, it was time for them to officially lead separate lives. In the days that followed, Yoko called the apartment frequently, but only wanted to speak to May. She asked her how John was handling the news of their impending divorce. May wrote later that Yoko did not believe that John was okay and in good spirits. She tried not to get too excited. She felt that Yoko, in the end, would probably not divorce John, and that John would likely find it difficult to live without Yoko. While May and John had a lot of freedom in New York, when a crazed fan arrived on their doorstep, John became paranoid, convinced that one day one of his deranged fans would end him. They moved into the Pierre Hotel. After about a month in New York, they went back to LA to finish John's rock and roll record. On the plane home, John confronted May about a previous relationship and was concerned because he heard she had a low sex drive and believed he was not physically fulfilling her. Though she tried to reassure him, nothing she said convinced John that she was satisfied with him as a lover. According to May, he became very intoxicated during the journey home, continued harassing her regarding her past relationship, and got sick on the plane. By the time they landed, John asked May what happened on the flight. He had no recollection of the argument they had. They returned to their apartment, most of which was fixed up, and John apologized profusely. May told him to forget about it. John cried and continued to apologize. She held him like a baby, and they fell asleep together. When John and May returned to the Troubadour to attend the Smothers Brothers comeback show, John made yet another scene, this one worse than the last. As he downed one Brandy Alexander after the other, he told May he loved her. Photographers took pictures of them kissing. May was shocked. Though they were together all the time, they could not show affection so publicly, as word would get out in the press that John had a new girlfriend, and Yoko would most likely be angry. John said he didn't care. During this outing, John teamed up with musician, friend, and mutual bad influence Harry Nilsson. He and Nilsson heckled Dick Smothers and sang loudly during the show. The crowd began to turn against John and told him to shut up. Peter Lawford told John he came to see the Smothers Brothers, not him. The Smothers Brothers' manager told John to stop and grabbed him, which triggered John. He flipped the table over. Then a gang of bartenders, led by Lawford, surrounded John and began throwing punches. John, May, and Harry were thrown out of the club into the chaos of photographers outside. John tackled a young parking attendant to the ground for no reason. Despite being attacked, the kid was starstruck and could not believe that the John Lennon was tackling him. John, noticing his admiration, backed off. The next morning, May woke up to an angry phone call from Yoko. She blamed May for allowing John to act as he did. After Yoko hung up, May saw the papers. News of her and John's affair were all over the headlines. Due to the intense media attention, John wanted to get away. He and May traveled to Palm Springs with Nilsson. However, John's behavior, according to May, once again took a turn for the worse.
Did he become physically abusive to you?
He did a couple of times, yeah.
Knock you around a bit?
He threw me against the wall. Sure.
Didn't he become a blackout drunk? And not remember those things?
Right, he did that a couple of times. He couldn't remember.
Once again, after he sobered up, he had no memory of what he had done the night before and was groveling to May for forgiveness. At this point, she considered leaving John. May came from a household in which her father regularly abused her mother, so this type of behavior was unfortunately normalized for her. She was also young, only 23 years old, and dating one of the most famous men in the world, who she had also fallen in love with. A combination of these factors made it difficult for her to walk away. To finish his album, John and several other rock stars, including Nilsson, Keith Moon, and Ringo Starr, moved into a home built by Louis B. Mayer in Santa Barbara. John got a kick out of the fact that they were living in the same place that JFK and RFK were said to have used to carry out their affair with Marilyn Monroe. Paul McCartney visited, and May took the last known photo of John and Paul together there. While they had a jam session together, Paul may have also come to Santa Barbara as a go-between, as he had a message for John from Yoko. He told John that she would take him back if he moved back to New York, courted her, asked her out on dates, gave her flowers, and if he accepted that he would not move back to the Dakota right away. John brushed off these conditions and told Paul, "I'm with May." Though he was surrounded by some of the rowdiest, most troublemaking rock stars of the time, John stopped drinking during this period. He may have rejected the message Yoko sent through McCartney, but he also withdrew entirely from May, going days with barely speaking to her, insisting that he needed time alone. When John returned to New York to help Nilsson with his album, he left May in Los Angeles. At this point, she thought it could be the end. May was alone in LA for several weeks. John informed her during a phone call that he was seeing Yoko again. After some time, however, John summoned her to New York and their affair resumed. May needed him to assure her that he wanted her there and that Yoko had not put him up to asking her back. He eased her mind by playing a song he wrote for her called "Surprise, Surprise," which made May cry. In the song, John wrote that May gets me through this god-awful loneliness. It would appear on his upcoming album, Walls and Bridges, which also has a song dedicated to Yoko on it. They began living together at May's apartment again, but it was clear by the amount of fans congregating outside each day that they would need to move. Yoko came to visit and called it a dump. She also mentioned that there was an empty apartment at the Dakota. May was resistant to the idea of being in such close proximity to Yoko. They instead moved to a penthouse on East 52nd Street, overlooking the East River. John was excited to live so close to Greta Garbo. May informed her Catholic mother that she was living with John, and was afraid of how she would react. Surprisingly, her mother was okay with her daughter living with a married rock star 10 years her senior, and wanted to meet John. May was angered and disappointed when John refused, but kept her feelings to herself. John and May saw what they believed to be a UFO while standing naked on the terrace of their apartment. "I wish it had taken us away," John longingly said. May wrote in her memoir several years later that it would have been better for them both if it had. For John's 34th birthday, May got John a sitar with an inscription, "All of my love," on the back. Yoko called the next day and told her how uncomfortable the gift made John. that he believed May wanted to marry him because of it, scolding her, "You know you shouldn't do things like that." There was a major turning point in John and May's relationship when she and John attended the premiere of an off-Broadway musical inspired by Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in November 1974. Yoko showed up at the Beacon Theater where the show was being held, despite telling John she didn't want to go. Then, Harold Seidler, one of John's attorneys, approached John and told him that Yoko was there and did not want to sit in the back. It was a test, one that May feared would not go in her favor. Sensing John was about to capitulate, May asked if he wanted her to move. John said, "Tell her she'll have to sit in the back." May was amazed. Yoko was calm throughout the show and commented that she liked the songs. It was the first time she had heard many of them, per May's account. At the end of the show, John and May rushed out of the theater and into their limo. Yoko pursued them, calling John's name, and was humiliated when the limo pulled away, leaving her on the sidewalk without any acknowledgement, with numerous witnesses surrounding her. At the after-party, John flirted with other women in front of May, going so far as to even allow a girl to sit on his lap. May threatened to leave if he didn't stop. John kept getting drunker and continued flirting with other women, so May left. Perhaps John felt guilty for leaving Yoko alone on the sidewalk and was upsetting May to make himself feel better. When she returned home, she called Yoko to see if she was with John. Yoko said she didn't know where he was, but she was considering taking him back. May said she knew this was the beginning of the end. John had humiliated Yoko, and it seemed she had to reassert her dominance. When John returned to the apartment the next morning, he claimed that he had gone to a woman's apartment, but that they had not slept together. When May pushed back, he accused her of being a pouty housewife. May told him what Yoko said. "That's just Yoko," John replied. "I'm not going back." May didn't believe him. Shortly after the incident at the Beacon Theater, Elton John asked John to perform a few songs with him at his show at Madison Square Garden. It would be his first public performance in 3 years. On the evening before the show, he became violently ill after having too much champagne and cocaine. He clung to May in bed, telling her he never wanted to hurt her again like he did in the past. The following morning, he was still unwell, and it was unclear if he'd make the show. To add even more pressure, Yoko wanted to come. When the moment finally came, John was racked with anxiety and wanted it to be over. But once he got on stage, the crowd roared, the garden shook, and he was back in his element. He asked May to stand on the side of the stage where he could see her cheering him on. He and Elton wore flowers on their lapels, gifts from Yoko, who did end up attending the concert. After his performance, John and Yoko held hands backstage, while May nervously looked on. He and Yoko were considering getting back together, though later Yoko said she still had her doubts. Backstage at the Elton show, John was like he wanted to eat me up or something. But I said, "Oh, please don't start this again. I really don't want to come back together so much, because I thought it would be the same thing all over again. The entourage, people being so jealous, whispering to him, and the whole world hating me. And also I lost my artistic credit. I couldn't make anything without people attacking it. My career was killed, and my dignity as a person was totally gone. And do I want to go back to that because I love that guy? I was thinking it's like a doomed love affair that could kill the both of us. I thought we could be friends, though that never happened with either of my ex-husbands." One day, in early 1975, Yoko called claiming she had found a way to quit smoking for a week and wanted John to try it. John was excited, given he had a 2-pack-a-day habit that was affecting his breathing and gave him a chronic, nasty cough. Though Yoko was vague on the details as to how she quit, she told John she set up a meeting with him and her anti-smoking specialist, who turned out to be a hypnotist. When his meeting with the smoking guy came up, Yoko called and said it was canceled because the stars weren't right. She would reschedule, cancel the meeting, then blame the unfavorable stars several more times. May told John something was up, but he didn't listen. May's anxiety was increasing with each call. Finally, one Friday, Yoko set up the meeting and did not call within the hour to cancel. John got up to leave. May begged him not to go, crying, saying she had never asked him for anything but this one thing. John reassured her, telling her he would take her out to dinner afterwards, and left. He believed May was making too much of this. 5 hours later, John still hadn't returned. May called the Dakota. Yoko told her John couldn't come to the phone. She called a few hours after that and received a similar reply. She was upset and shaking, but tried to get some sleep. She called the Dakota again the next morning when John had not returned to their apartment. Yoko told May he would call later. He was exhausted from the treatment. She waited by the phone all day, but it never rang. May called the Dakota on Sunday and received a similar response. She and John had scheduled dentist appointments together for that Monday. May appeared at hers, feeling and looking terrible, having barely eaten or slept all weekend. John was not there when she arrived, but when her appointment was done, he was sitting in the waiting room, looking similarly disheveled and tired. He barely said a word to her. May waited for him to be done with his cleaning, and they left together. She asked if he was coming home with her. Ugh, right. Okay. He was disoriented, and May described him as zombie-like as they walked without saying a word to the apartment. When they arrived, John revealed that Yoko had allowed him to come home. He wanted to pack a few things and leave. It isn't anybody's fault. It just happened, he told her. It wasn't intended to be. His voice trailed off. May knew what he meant. She cried and said nothing. May reflected that this came just when she and John had been happy for a sustained period, and that Yoko couldn't stand that. She didn't know why she did it, but she called Yoko and congratulated her. I'm sure you'll be very happy, May said. Happy? I don't know if I'll ever be happy, Yoko replied with bitterness. John told May about the hypnotherapy, which was pretty much the primal therapy he and Yoko had done a few years before, just as the Beatles were breaking up, which scarred him. He said he had vomited all night and felt horrible. May believed that it brought back terrible memories of his childhood and his feelings of abandonment. John reassured her that he still loved her, that Yoko had said she could still be his mistress. He brought 2 vials of liquid, gifts from Yoko, and gave one to May. She said it smelled horrible, while his smelled pleasant. He comforted her and told her it would be okay, that he still loved her. He undressed her and they made love. He got up afterwards and told her he had to go home. She lay there for hours in shock. Along with being dumped, May realized she would likely have no job and no place to live. May clung to the dim hope that John would return to her, but also knew this was wishful thinking. Sometime after, May went to an apothecary and discovered the liquid that Yoko gave her was a mix of sulfur, arrowroot, and chili powder. The shopkeeper told her to throw it away immediately, that whoever gave it to her hated her. John's was a mix of rose, geranium, lemon, and gardenia, an incredibly powerful aphrodisiac according to the apothecary. While their romantic relationship was done, their physical one continued. On top of that, John still expected May to work for him after all that had happened. He even asked her of what she thought of he and Yoko's statement announcing the reconciliation. We've decided to say our separation failed. John came back to the apartment they once shared and began not so subtly hinting that he wanted her to move out. He also took a pair of her leather pants and went through her closet looking for more clothes of hers to take. One of John's lawyers made an arrangement with John and Yoko to allow May to continue to work for them for an annual salary of $15,000, but she was not paid for any of the work she did during her 18th month affair with John, even though she continued being his personal assistant during this period. In March of 1975, John met with May for coffee and informed her that she could no longer work for them. Yoko was expecting a child. Per May's memoir, John asked, "Don't you wish it was your baby? You could have become pregnant by me to keep me." "Did someone tell you I wanted to trick you or trap you?" May asked. "No," he uncomfortably replied. May told John she had a new boyfriend, an Irish musician. He wasn't too happy to hear this. They went back to their old apartment and were intimate. While May believed this would be the final chapter of their romance, they would continue seeing each other over the next 3 years, meeting at the apartment of an old friend to make love and catch up. May struggled to find a new job in the music industry for nearly 2 years. She believes that it was her association with John and Yoko that caused her unemployment, as record labels feared they would not be able to work with John if they hired her. Despite his power, John did not step in to help her with her job search. In the aftermath of the lost weekend, John spoke to several publications about how miserable he was throughout his 18th-month separation from Yoko. He claimed that they reunited after they saw each other at the Elton John concert, which was not quite true since he and May did not officially break up until about 3 months after that encounter. When asked if he was happy that Yoko took him back, he said, "Well, I am. It's like, and this is no disrespect to anybody else I was having relationships with, but I feel like I was running with me head off, and now I've got me head back on. We knew we were getting back together. It was just a matter of when. We knew. Everybody else might not have, but we did." Regarding May, he said, "May's handling it all right. It's hard to know, because I'm hardly spending any time with her. Any time at all, actually. But what can I do about it? She knew what the scene was from the start. There was no question." John and Yoko renewed their vows at the Dakota after reuniting. John kept a detailed diary during the lost weekend, showed it to Yoko, then burned it in front of her, perhaps as a confession and a gesture of devotion. However, according to May, they continued seeing each other periodically up until the birth of Sean Lennon in October of 1975. Several months later, a chance encounter at a restaurant briefly brought them back together. John came over and sat with May, despite embarrassing both Yoko and May's date. He told her he didn't think her new man was good for her, and that the negative things he said about his lost weekend in the press were not a reflection of how he actually felt about her. Rather, they were things he had to say. Yoko glared at May until John returned to their table. May was informed by a fan that had recently had lunch with John that he told her he was cutting ties with his past, and that not only included people, but also music. He and Yoko hung up a Civil War-era dagger above their bed and swore to move forward without a thought of what came before. John even hung up his guitar, believing music to be a thing of his past, too. May was in disbelief and feared she would also be left behind, which turned out to be true. John stopped making music for 5 years and retreated to the Dakota to raise Sean. One morning in 1978, John called May after nearly a year of not speaking and asked if he could come over. She called in sick from her job, and he came to her apartment. John was in the midst of a panic attack when he arrived, and May held him to calm him down. May and John listened to Reminiscing by the Little River Band over and over and made love in their old bed. This would be the last time she saw John. On Memorial Day of 1980, John called May from Cape Town, South Africa. They hadn't spoken in over a year and a half. May now worked at ABC Radio. She had given up on the music business. John told her he wished he could help her, but couldn't. "I do wish I could have been better to you, Feng Yi," he said to her. John talked about his sons and said he wanted to spend time in the Hamptons with her. He promised to call her to arrange it when he returned from Cape Town. However, this was the last time they would speak. A week later, she received a postcard that a fan had sent John. He scratched out his own name and wrote in hers. May was very hurt by his 1980 Playboy interview in which he reinforced the narrative that Yoko had thrown him out and that he was miserable throughout his lost weekend. "It was god-awful. I drank too much, I was out of control, and nobody was looking after me. And I needed somebody to love me, and there was nobody there to support me, and I just fell apart." In actuality, as May later pointed out, John artistically flourished when he was with May. He reunited with his son and called him twice a week with May's encouragement, and was on his way to perhaps finding himself apart from the Beatles and Yoko for the first time in his life. However, May believes all of his personal growth was cut short by his reunion with Yoko and, unfortunately, his tragic murder.
Yes, I was up at in the Upper West Side at a friend's apartment having dinner, and I had heard that over the radio, and my heart just sank. I just didn't know what else.
In December of 1980, while having dinner at a friend's apartment, May heard the news on the radio that a man believed to be John Lennon was shot and killed. May was in shock. She called David Bowie's secretary, who urged her to come over. She and David held each other and cried all night. May lamented the loss of a man who had accomplished so much, yet was still struggling to find himself, and how much potential he still had. May wrote in her memoir that she was grateful for the good times and adventure that John brought to her life, and that she missed him very much. Despite all of the pain she endured with and without John, she said she would do it all over again if given the chance. Her story was published in 1983. She wrote that John encouraged her to share her account with the world. She continued to pursue photography, got married in the late 1980s, and had 2 children. In the years since John's lost weekend, conflicting versions of this time period have been documented from John, Yoko, and May. John called it his lost weekend because he perceived this to be a time of excess and debauchery for him, a time when he was yet again a little boy lost, despite achieving heights of success that very few will ever experience. Yoko has consistently emphasized that the separation was always meant to be temporary, a time for her to establish her own career and independence. May maintains that John flourished artistically during this period, and that they experienced true love together. Whatever the truth may be, it's not just May that claims that John's feelings for her lingered. Robert Rosen, who was tasked with transcribing John's journals after his death, told the blog Absolutely Everywhere in 2001. It was so clear he was dying to be with Pang, and he couldn't do it. He wrote about that a lot. John, contradicting the typical narrative spun on the lost weekend, once told the journalist, "I may have been the happiest I've ever been. I love this woman." John was a deeply conflicted man, wrestling with his feelings of abandonment and unworthiness, all while being too famous to go to the grocery store. There were many barriers preventing him and May from being together, but ultimately it most likely was his own demons and hang-ups that doomed their romance.
I couldn't compete with Yoko. Absolutely not. I was too young.
You couldn't be a mother to John.
I didn't want to be, and that's more important. But we never lost our love for each other.
During one of their final stolen meetings, John allegedly told May that he wished he could sleep next to her all night like they used to. According to May, he followed that up by saying, "But you can only get out once." Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Affair Archivist. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join me next month when we delve into another affair from history.